friends. Terra Symbolica. Subscribe. Here with Russell again, and we have decided to go see Inception, Christopher Nolan's Inception, which is playing at the IMAX here in Sydney, down at Darling Harbour. This is an old film. Obviously it was released in 2010, so it's about 15 years old now. Geez, we're getting old. If Inception is 15 years old. From one of the most acclaimed contemporary directors. Christopher Nolan first made it big. That's a bizarre bell whistle, a bike whistle, bike bell. First made it big with his first major feature film. It wasn't his first film, Memento. I think that came out, was it 2001?
Which is another great film about layers of subconscious memories, relationships to knowing.
And the chronological narrative is inverted in that film as well. So a recurrent motif in Christopher Nolan's oeuvre is a sense of self and identity in relation to the material world and memory. Are memories reliable? Can they be trusted in relation to the way that we experience reality? So there is an epistemological dimension to his films. And he usually weaves in a lot of these very interesting psychological phenomena and philosophical phenomena into blockbuster narratives, which is unique because you either get the auteur art house director like David Lynch, who I suppose has done that a little bit with Twin Peaks, but generally speaking his films are not blockbusters. They are very much still indie films, right? And he'll have recourse to these sorts of motifs like memory, dreams, the imagination, what is reality, what is it not, etc. But Nolan was able to do something very different, beginning with Memento. Then he did Insomnia with Al Pacino and Hilary Swank, which is it's based on a novel about an insomniac detective in Alaska, I think, who is tracking down a killer, played by Robin Williams. Phenomenal film. Do you agree? Yeah, Insomnia. Then after Insomnia, I think he had his major blockbuster break with the Dark Knight trilogy. And of course, I think that Russell and I should return to the Dark Knight itself at some stage. The second film in that trilogy with Heath Ledger's Joker. Christian Bale, of course, plays Batman. It's a star-studded cast. You have Michael Caine as Alfred. You have Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. Liam Neeson is in the first film as Ra's al Ghul, etc., etc. I'm so tempted to go into a massive side tangent about Batman and how great it is, but we're going to leave it. Suffice it to state that the Batman films also deal with notions of chaos and order, especially the Dark Knight, the trickster figure and his role in disrupting order, the self-sacrificial hero, which is Batman himself, and of course the nature of self-sacrifice on a grand scale. They are all influenced by grand literary narratives, especially The Dark Knight Rises, which was based in a way structurally on Charles Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities, with the whole bourgeoisie proletariat battle that unfolds there between the rich and the poor in Gotham City. The second film is like a Gnostic myth, in a sense. There's good and there's evil. Evil is represented by the Joker, and you have all these ethical scenarios that the Joker is trying to present to figures like Batman himself and also Harvey Dent, who becomes Two-Face. But we're not going to look at that. The Dark Knight is indeed based on, at least aesthetically and cinematographically, Michael Mann's oeuvre. Films like Heat, 1995, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Films like Collateral, great film with Tom Cruise. So he's been influenced by all of these great directors as well as great authors, precisely because he has an undergraduate degree in literature from one of those prestigious universities. I can't remember which one. Is it Oxford? Is it Cambridge?
Yeah, no, I can't remember.
He's very well educated, Christopher Nolan. And so after he had been successful with the Dark Knight trilogy that he thought that he could actually execute the film that we're going to see tonight, which is Inception. Because apparently he'd been working on this idea of it started off originally as a horror film about people entering into the dreams of others and either stealing information or incepting, placing ideas in there, but it became a heist film,
which
right?
is similar to the sort of Freddy Krueger style of, can you enter someone else's dreams and have an effect?
That's how he started it.
Yeah.
But after his blockbuster success with the Dark Knight trilogy, he had enough money to be able to turn it into a heist film, to get an all-star cast together. He had wanted to work with Leonardo DiCaprio for many years, and DiCaprio was intrigued by the script, which he read. What's the name of the actress? Cotillard, Marion Cotillard, the French actress, and I'm butchering the French pronunciation. She's in this film. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Tom Hardy, Michael Caine. It's an all-star cast.
Yeah, it is actually.
And the synopsis of the film is basically about an elite crack team of agents, let's say, who are able to extract information from people's dreams while they're dreaming, and they knock them out with some kind of a device. We'll talk about the rudiments after the film, because I haven't seen it in a while. I don't remember exactly how they put people to sleep in order to extract their dreams, but then this Japanese business mogul hires them to incept, let's say, to put an idea in the son of his rival businessman in order to dissolve his company, so that, you know, this Japanese mogul no longer has a competitor.
Yeah, like the military tool.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the film operates with what sort of motifs in the dream world, which is something that you wanted to discuss, Russell?
Well, the thing I'm looking for is, I'm relying on memory, but some loose ideas around, are dreams just cataloguing and sorting the day's events and have no intrinsic meaning, or are they more like something like a repressed subconscious true personhood that's been hidden and trying to emerge and relay some important meaningful message? Or is it something more like the modern neuroscientific view, which is that it's essentially an imaginative tool that you use to predict an unpredictable environment? So you have to create models of reality, and you need an imaginative landscape to do that. But if you went into any of those kind of three basic ideas, is it being represented in the film? There's also the other thing, there's elements of the philosophical, metaphysical, epistemological. Metaphysical meaning, you know, what goes outside the laws of physics, or what we know from the laws of nature. What rules are operating? Are they different dimensions? Is it all in someone's head? And epistemological, how do we know things? So how could you know if you're in a dream? Is there any way you could know? Can you ever really know if you're in a simulation? Those kind of questions.
Yeah. So there's a lot of food for thought here in relation to what constitutes the nature of dreaming, which we all experience. There are, for example, distinctions between the levels of consciousness that play out in dreams. Obviously, when we dream, we're not conscious in an alert, directed way. So the subconscious, alternately defined by Freud pretty consistently, he was adamant to call it the unconscious after a certain amount of time, because he just contrasted it to consciousness. When you're unconscious of what you're doing, it's happening without you directing it.
Yeah.
Although that contradicts a certain sub-branch of onirology, oniro being the Greek word for dream, onirology, the study of dreams, which does believe, this is prevalent amongst parapsychologists, who believe that dreams, that you can be taught to be conscious during your dreams and to become a dream navigator, an onironaut.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not just esoteric, it's also something that's purportedly scientific. Now, I've had those sort of conscious dreams in the past without any consistent training to learn how to, direct my dreams, the scenes, the characters, the narrative. We've all been, made aware that we are within a dream. Sometimes, like it happens sometimes, right? Oh, this is actually a dream.
Some people claim not to.
Oh, really?
Like I used to lucid dream a lot when I was younger, and why I loved the film Waking Life, because it's basically an exploration of of lucid dreaming, and it has that hidden assumption that maybe if I can navigate in my dreams, I'll discover something about myself that I can't in ordinary life, because I'm trained to think in a certain way.
And look, Neurology also has experimented with those who are directing the course of their dreams, the onironauts, being able to communicate with people who are awake while they're dreaming, and they usually use muscle twitches and various other muscle
somatic
contortions,
clues, physiological clues,
to demonstrate that they are able to that they're aware what's happening in the waking world. Now that's interesting because of this film's presupposition. It's predicated on the fact that this crack team of specialists led by Leonardo DiCaprio, Cobb's character, Dom Cobb, can in fact share the same dream and interact with one another in an active way, directing the course of events within the same dream, which operates on the level of, well, look, we've defined consciousness and unconsciousness. It's on the level of the subconscious, to use Jungian terminology, which is, it doesn't function quite this way in the film. The subconscious emerges almost autonomously into the conscious mind based on the repository of things that we've experienced throughout the day, throughout our lives, inserting images and so on and so forth. The unconsciousness, not accessible by a conscious mind, is manifested in our, let's say, behaviors that we cannot necessarily control. Gestures, tics, habits, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I think that the level in which they are invading other people's dreams in this film happens on the level of subconsciousness, although they are like onironauts, let's say. Shall we?
I have one last thing that I'll be looking for. So Carl Johnson, who's written a book, Philosophy and Inception, he thinks that a lot of the film is a misdirect, and the main film is about the whole thing is a dream, and that you're supposed to look for what is meant by the whole thing being a dream,
which makes it even more meta.
It is.
But I don't necessarily
right.
subscribe to that.
I'm looking to go in and see if that's reasonable, because in that case then it seems like it's mostly about Cobb and trying to understand what's happened in the real world with his relationship with his wife and his children.
Yeah, that's right.
So then it seems like it is that kind of idea,
which would make it very Lynchian.
A psychoanalytic practice.
Perhaps that's a register upon which you can function. Because if you look at it from a linear point of view, the course of events that are happening with people invading dreams and so on is happening, but then there's an ambiguity left at the end of the film, which we won't disclose now for those who haven't seen it. We'll do that when we do our recap post-film. But there are some themes that we want to discuss, namely three main topics or motifs that are present in the film that are drawn from ancient Greek mythology and Roman Catholicism, namely the Labyrinth, obviously coming out of Theseus slaying the Minotaur, that ancient Cretan myth, Greek myth, the doctrine of, well, it's not a doctrine, it's more like theological speculation in relation to Limbo, applied consistently in the film as a place where the mind can be lost entirely within the dreamscape and the dream world if it's not kicked back into up, or kicked up, let's say, into more present layers of dreaming consciousness. And the other one that we wanted to address, oh gosh, let's just go over here.
Well then,
is Plato's allegory of the cave. So we're going to have a beer and we're going to think about it for a little bit.
And one other thing that I would do is the nature of metaphors and how they work, because in the Matrix, the bottom level is the real level, and you project on top to it the simulation, the illusory world. Whereas in this, the top level is the true level, which you presume, and you go down into the subconscious, and it's dreams within dreams. But does that make sense? If you're going down into dreams to find the true you, is it not then the bottom level? Anyway, trying to figure out how those metaphors work will be interesting.
Yeah, from which vantage point? Okay.
Right, let's do it.
We'll resume soon. So Rusty and I have just sat down for a schooner of Newtowner. We're getting a bit of a bite before we head off to the IMAX to watch Inception. The idea of the labyrinth. Okay, the ancient Greek myth in relation to this geometrically consistent and symmetrical yet complex and thus almost indecipherable unless one is psychologically and mathematically trained to be able to navigate it, structure. Okay, that's what a labyrinth is. When you enter a labyrinth, you need to pay very close attention to the way that it's designed in order to make your way to the other side. So it's a metaphor for the difficulties of life, for having to have your wits about you, for having to, let's say, undergo challenges in order to be renewed. That's why the labyrinth is associated with the journey of the hero. The hero's journey that we've discussed before numerous times in our videos. Why is the labyrinth relevant to the film Inception? Well, the young girl played by the then Ellen Page, who is hired by Cobb to design the architecture of the dreamscape for this mission in order to incept, I'm using it as a verb here, the idea into Cillian Murphy, the son of the business mogul's dream. Her name is Ariadne. Ariadne is the character in the myth, in the Greek myth, who gives the hero, the Greek hero Theseus, the ball of string in order to help him navigate the labyrinth. So, if you don't know the myth, it appears in various recensions throughout Greek mythology, Apollodorus' library, Plutarch's Athenian Lives. It's been synthesized in a very consistent way by Robert Graves in his The Greek Myths. And it goes something like this. The king of Athens had to pay yearly tribute, 7 youths, boys and girls, to King Minos of Crete after having lost a battle with him. King Minos, now was it the palace of Knossos? We don't know. On Crete has a labyrinth, a constructed labyrinth. Modern archaeology seems to think that it might have been associated with the palace of Knossos. This labyrinth hides his secret, which is his son, the Minotaur, the bull-headed beast or monster, who has a name. Could you look up the Minotaur's name? Minotaur's real name, because it's interesting. Borges has written a short story from the perspective of the Minotaur within the labyrinth, which is very, very interesting. So, Theseus is the prince of Athens, and he gets very upset that his father is sending these youths every year, so he volunteers himself because these youths are chosen by lot, and his father discloses to him that his Asterion is the name of the Minotaur, Asterion. So his father discloses to him that Theseus's name was never put into the lots that were drawn, whoever's name is drawn is chosen to go to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. And so he asks to be sent the following year, and he does sail over with his father's soldiers and also the boys and girls, the young men and women who are going to be sacrificed. Long story short, he encounters Ariadne, who also feels like a prisoner within her cruel father's palace, King Minos, and she agrees to help Theseus, and she gives him a sword, and she gives him the ball of thread that Theseus uses to navigate successfully the labyrinth, and when he reaches its deepest echelons, he slays the Minotaur, he slays the beast, but Ariadne asks him to promise to save her from the palace, to rescue her on the way out. And there are various recensions in relation to what takes place next. As they sail away from Crete, Theseus, having liberated the youths who had been sent over with him to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, they escape King Minos and his men. Ariadne is on the ship. Some sources say that her sister Phaedra is on the ship as well. They arrive at the island of Naxos, and then a storm quickly sweeps through the island. This is one recension, and Theseus asks his men if Ariadne is on the ship, ready to sail away from Naxos to go back to Athens. The men mistake Ariadne for Phaedra. Ariadne was left behind on Naxos. That's the version that turns Theseus, makes him innocent. The version that makes him guilty is that he deliberately abandons Ariadne on Naxos, which is taken up by contemporary feminists as indicating Theseus's misogyny. There are other stories which indicate that Theseus was not necessarily the best towards women, although by the standards of his day, just like any other of these heroes, right? But nevertheless, the whole point isn't to give a feminist critique of this story, because the whole point is that he slays the Minotaur, right, out of craftiness and so on and so forth, and that a female protagonist, namely Ariadne, helped him to navigate the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur. Is Cobb like a new Theseus, navigating these labyrinths in order to slay the metaphorical inner monster, namely his memory of his wife Mal, played by Marion Cotillard, whose tragedy we will delineate at length, I think, after we watch the film. But she haunts his dreams because they stayed in the dream world for too long together. One night was like 50 years, and when they awoke in the film, Marion Cotillard believed that she was still in the dream world. She was still asleep. That she was still asleep.
Sorry, you were just hiding in the corner.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. Good on you. Cheers.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you. That's his own Minotaur, let's say, in a metaphorical or figurative sense, and Ariadne will help him with this as the film unfolds. So the labyrinth is relevant in relation to the dreamscapes that are constructed by Ariadne. She's like the constructor of the labyrinth here, in a similar way that Ariadne in the original myth gave the ball of thread to Theseus to navigate the labyrinth, and that's why this myth is relevant. The other relevant myth is Plato's allegory of the cave. Where we go? This direction. So now that we're fed and we've been nourished, we can talk about our second myth, which is Plato's allegory of the cave, very famous. Plato, the great 4th century BC Greek philosopher and student of Socrates, the Athenian, who was executed, put to death by the magistrates and the Athenian law courts for corrupting the youth. In other words, for getting them to question the preconceived practices, laws, religious behaviors of the Athenians, notorious for not really believing in the many gods but only in one god. Plato uses Socrates as the main interlocutor in all of his dialogues, which is the principal medium or genre through which he expounds his philosophy, his way of life. So it's Socrates arguing with another Athenian, someone who both of them would have known, and in this particular, let's say, episode in Plato's Politia or Republic, Socrates is speaking with Plato's brother Glaucon, and Socrates, in order to delineate basically Plato's cosmology, his view of the world, deploys the parable of the cave. And how does the parable of the cave go? Well, very briefly, imagine that there's a subterranean cavern.
Sorry, the allegory of the cave.
The allegory of the cave. Thank you, allegory of the cave. In the allegory of the cave, there's a subterranean cavern within which people are bound with their necks and hands in chains. They are unable to turn their heads to the left or to the right, so they can't see each other, and they're staring at a wall. Behind them is a fire, right, just above them, and in between where they're sitting with their backs to the fire and the fire itself is like a low parapet, a low wall, the sort of which Plato describes is used by puppeteers during their performances, the marionettes. And people are carrying objects along this wall, and the fire is casting the shadow of these objects, whether they be statues or, chariots or whatever they are. And the people who are bound believe that the shadows that are being cast by the fire onto the wall of these objects, onto the wall, are reality. And obviously these shadows are not reality, and if people start murmuring or talking as they're carrying these objects, the people who are bound believe that, these shadows are making those sounds. And Socrates rhetorically asks, if someone were to escape from this habitual false representation of reality, Would it be difficult? Yes, it would be difficult. If they were to move from the darkness to the fire itself, to look upon it, would they not struggle to see the source of the shadows? Yes, they would. And what if they were to be taken out of the cave gradually? They'd have to move through phases or stages. They would begin by looking at the reflections of things in water, for example, and finally they could look upon the sun, and they could see that actually the life that they were living beforehand was a false representation of reality, that reality itself is in the world above this subterranean cave. This contrast between the darkness of ignorance and the light of knowledge, the light of truth, being emphatically contrasted in the emergence of the subterranean cave dweller from that cave into the light. So, this is an archetypal almost story. It's used by Plato in order to put forward his cosmology, which begins with, the material world comprising of particular things that are imperfect and imperfectly modeled upon their universal forms or archetypes, upon which all particular things are modeled. These are the categories, the universal categories upon which all particular things in the world are modeled. So if Russell and I are two different men, we're imperfect, we age, we grow old, we'll die, I'm short, he's tall, etc. In the world of the forms, which can only be apprehended intellectually, there's a universal man who's perfect, and it's upon this particular man, this universal man, that all particular men are modeled. Just to give you an example, none of that is really relevant for the film, the cosmology. What's relevant is the allegory itself, because of what Mal experiences. She believes the dream state that she dwells in with Cobb is real. But it's not real. Even though it's rich, even though it's vivid, even though it lasts for 50 years, in one night, let's say, one actual night in reality.
Do you mean when they're in limbo?
No, this is what he had experienced. We learn at the end of the film he had experienced with Mal.
Yeah.
But it also applies to Limbo as well, where him and Sato, is that the name of the Japanese mogul?
Well, but I guess in the sense that there's the period where she
goes
to
the light
to the different level, and she wants to escape because she feels like she's in the cave, and that's why she wants to kill herself.
Well, that's also relevant. That's another way of applying it.
Well, that's why she kills herself.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's not the real world.
Exactly, because of, this, it's also in the allegory itself that if the one who has been enlightened, like Cobb coming out of the cave, which is the dreamscape, that's the cave in this film. The cave is the dreamscape, okay? So having come out of the dreamscape, he's had a bit of fun in there with Mal, but he's seen reality again and experienced reality again, the waking world, and he tries to bring Mal out of that world, and she refuses. She wants to stay within that world. That's also recounted in Plato's allegory of the cave, where he basically says that the one who's been enlightened by the truth will go back into the cave and try to shake those who are still ensnared out of their ignorance, but they will prefer their false representation of reality to reality itself, so much so that they'll put the enlightened person to death if they could. And this is what Mal kind of inadvertently does. She kills herself and frames Cobb so that he can live with her in the dreamscape forever, because she actually believes it's not just a matter of her being conscious of the fact that she's in the dreamscape. She believes that the dreamscape is the real world. So she's got this misapprehension there as well. So that's the second. We've spoken about the Labyrinth, the first influence of Greek mythology on Inception. The second is Plato's allegory of the cave, which appears in his Republic. Well, those are the Greek myths. Limbo now is an interesting phenomenon that comes out of the scholastic formulations of medieval philosophers and theologians, which tries to designate a space in the afterlife for those who have not received the requisite baptism that leads to salvation. So if from Christ's time onwards, with his death and resurrection on the third day, that's participated in as an anticipation by all the baptized, then the baptized can access heaven potentially. Yes, then the baptized can access heaven. But here's the IMAX. Here we are. But those who have not been baptized will not have access to heaven. So the question asked by the scholastics, which is not resolved in a lot of the early fathers of the church, in a lot of those who reflect upon these theological issues, is what do you do then with people who died before Christ's coming, with unbaptized infants and so on, which I don't particularly like that topic much at all, and so on and so forth. Since they don't have immediate access to this grace, they can't go to heaven, is what some of these thinkers formulated, not all of them, so they must go into limbo in order to avoid their unjustly being sent to hell. Okay, so limbo is an in-between space. It's become a kind of offhand way of referring to an in-between or liminal space where people are stuck, and that's the way the lowest level of the subconscious dreaming or dreamscape is referred to in this film, isn't it? It's referred to consistently as limbo.
Yeah, because it's a holding pattern. But you're there long enough so you can build your own little reality. I don't know enough about limbo to say so.
Well, look, I mean, we're going to talk about it more after we watch the film. Here's IMAX again. Check it out, guys. Russell did not know what IMAX was, even up until just about... Now you do. But when we were having a bite to eat, he's like, what's different about IMAX and everything? Well, these are the biggest screens in the world, which is what I explained to you. So...
I don't believe it, but we'll find out.
I haven't been to IMAX. You know when was the last time I came to IMAX? In 2007 when I watched The Dark Knight.
Yes, I would have been 2005 or 6.
Okay. We've seen a long time ago.
Yeah.
And The Dark Knight was filmed on IMAX cameras, but this film was not. So he's gone back retrospectively and he's adjusted it for IMAX. So let's walk in actually. Let's go show people what IMAX looks like on the inside.
See you in the post review.
Oh, not yet. Let's go have a look at IMAX. Because you don't want to speak anymore now. That's all right. Well, let's have a look. This is on... That's Sydney Harbour, guys. It's a pretty good location here. You know, we've been going to our Art Nouveau, Art Deco, Cinema the Ritz up until now. Where did we watch Nosferatu? No, we watched that at Hoyt's, didn't we?
Yeah, regular old Hoyt's.
Regular old Hoyt's. But here we are at the IMAX. Let's... there might not be much to see inside, so we might just say goodbye here. I might give you a view of the screen very briefly. Does this ascent correspond to the size of the screen? Is what we're asking. And it probably does, Russell.
It's massive.
It's massive, yeah. So we're going on to level 2. Okay. Okay, we're going to try something different this time around. We've just come out of the film, and we're going to try to give our feedback, our retrospective feedback, right after watching it. So, Russell, take it away.
Well, I think the main summary, I can't stop getting past the idea of, like I said, is it supposed to be a dream overall? There was a little fact that someone told me about, Michael Caine's character in the film. He once, when he was giving the talk, said that you should feel assured that the scenes that he's in are the scenes that are reality.
Yep.
But at the end of the film, part of the dialogue, he's talking to Mal, is that she sort of points out to him, well, wait a minute, the real world, your so-called real world, being chased around the world by international conspiracy to keep you out of the country, and, you know, all that is very far-fetched, so surely that isn't real.
Yeah, because part of the reason why that's happening to him is because of when Mal Mole killed herself after being taken out of that subconscious dreamscape where they were building a whole world together and they grew old together. She, in the real world, although she thinks that the real world is the dreamscape, had filed a complaint with her lawyer that she was afraid for her life. And so when she organised for them to meet for their anniversary, they would meet at a specific hotel. She was on the other side of the ledge, on the exterior of the hotel, and she kills herself. She tries to force him into killing himself as well, so that they can both wake up and return to their kids. And that seems to be the emotional anchor in the film. The need for Cobb to return to his children. Obviously he leaves because she'd gotten herself declared sane by 3 psychologists, so that the suspicion was cast onto Cobb, onto Dom, and he left the country and he can't see his kids. They're being taken care of by Michael Caine. So what you were saying before alludes to the fact that Michael Caine's character, is he the father-in-law or is he his dad? I can't remember. Whenever he appears in the scene, it's reality, it's real life. Irrespective of the totems that we didn't mention earlier, were those objects, palpable objects, that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character explains to then Ellen Page's character, are meant to kind of, because they're so familiar with these specific objects, trigger them into waking up from the dreamscape.
The rule is that you don't let
not waking up, letting them know that this is the real world after they've woken up.
But you also notice you're not allowed to allow anyone else to touch it.
Yeah.
Right, and his object was the one that was in her safe.
That's right, so it was hers.
Yeah, so there's, like, I can see the idea that, alright, that if the whole thing is a dream, is it her dream or his dream? And they do talk about, she talks about again that metaphor that going up is where reality is, down is the subconscious processes where things are trying to be worked out, right? So that still means that then the whole movie as a whole is someone's subconscious representation of the real world. And I guess it has to revolve around some battle, some struggle. I presume it would have to be Cobb's. Otherwise it's going to be very hard to make sense of. But then it's very elaborate, all the other characters within it.
Who are themselves the catalyst for the descent into these subsequent levels of the subconscious. Because as they explain, and there's a lot of exposition, and let me tell you, the exposition is a little bit, let's say, stunts the narrative, if you like. There are a couple of reasons why I think it's problematic, which I'll get to in a minute, but after the sedative is given in order to get people into the deeper states of the subconscious, basically to get from one level to another, a different character has to be put to sleep within a dream. So we're all sharing character A's dream experience, right? Then within that character's dream experience, a different character has to be put to sleep within that dream in order to get to the next level of the dreamscape. And you can go as far down as 2, a dream within a dream, to quote Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem, is everything we seek or seem but a dream within a dream, okay, which removes you 2 steps from reality. They explain that the third layer of the subconscious is in fact we're being chased as well, like in the movie. The third layer, it's impossible to wake up out of unless you've been heavily sedated. You need the kicks, you need that process of coming up
but that's
otherwise if you're killed in that state, you remain in that state. And look, I mean, that's got another element to it because of the way that time is distorted the further down you go, so it's almost like he psychologized within the subconscious dreamscape the descent into Hades motif. The lower you go into the underworld, the more time is distorted, right? He doesn't have the backwards and forwards in time stuff which we see with Twin Peaks when Dale Cooper descends into the Black Lodge, right?
It's linear.
This is all very linear. It's all very structured, okay? And so,
that's why they try to have a much more of an element of realism in the dream. So, for example, the sedative acts on most of your conscious, unconscious processing, except for I guess it is the vestibular system, so it's your sense of balance can still be thrown off in a particular way. I mean, this is not, without a doubt, it's very scientifically plausible, but they're trying to stick to those rules, and many of the things like the distortion of time within dreams, and then how it feels like a long time in a dream, but you've been napping for 5 minutes. So it's trying to be a little more realistic to the phenomenology of how we experience dreams.
It's trying, but it doesn't succeed in that sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's going to...
Because dreams are all over the place.
Yeah, it's going to have to blend them. Well, but that's the other part of... Yeah, but how else would you do it unless you'd end up like a Lynch film?
Which I think Lynch is more successful in depicting dreams.
Yeah, because also when they wake up and look at each other, they've all had a collective conscious experience of events in a dream.
In a linear way.
What? Yeah, shared them exactly. No one. You wake up from dreams, sometimes they're really vivid and memorable, other times they're vaguely there.
And they jump from time, like time and space is distorted within dreams as well. It's never precisely linear,
But they're trying to. But see, it's hard to know when those aspects are trying to just give a sense of realism, or if they're trying to feed into elements of the general plot that's supposed to have some message as well. Not a message, have some theory, I guess, of what's really happening. Where are we?
Huh?
Where are we?
Oh, I'll lead you back this way, mate. We'll go up here. Yeah. Look, it's all it's all very good. That very final layer, because they go a fourth layer in at the end there, when he finally confronts the parasitic mole, who is a reflection of his own insecurity, because as he reveals at the very end of the film, he implanted within her, the reason why he knew Inception would work is because he had already incepted Mole by telling her that it was just a dream, this dreamscape they created for themselves, and the only way to wake up was to kill themselves after she'd been convinced that the dream world was real. So they did that with lying down on the train tracks, and this line that Mole repeats to him about, you're waiting for a train, you don't know where it's going, blah blah blah, the only thing that matters is that we're together, right? Is what he tells her with their heads on the tracks. They die, they wake up in the real world, but she still thinks that thought has carried over into the real world, and she believes that in order to wake up, she has to die.
Yep.
So it's kind of like it becomes cancerous, and that's why she ends up killing herself. That's all revealed at the end. So there are scenes towards the end of the film that shed light on scenes that take place earlier, and that does include also the scene with him encountering Sato as an old man at that very final level, where after all the action sequences and everything, and all of these action sequences are taking place within this very dense exposition that's constantly happening, Yeah,
well, and that last theme is kind of like the notion of I might be butchering it, but transference in like traditional Freudian style psychoanalysis is that, like, to become a psychoanalyst, you have to do years of therapeutic training on yourself. Like, you have to see a therapist to make sure that you don't go into your therapeutic practice and unconsciously transfer your own sort of unconscious biases, or project your own insecurities and fears and whatnot onto the patient, and what you think is some sort of meaningful, useful, therapeutic aim or goal. So what you think you're doing is for the greater good of the patient, but what you're actually doing is trying to serve your own need. So he's doing something a little similar there, I think.
Yeah, I think it functions on all of these registers, In the end, do you think that when he spins moles, as you pointed out, Totem, the spinning top, and it kind of stumbles a little bit. That's when he finally sees his kids, right? He's reunited. Because the whole premise is that his criminal record will be wiped clean by Sato, this billionaire, once they arrive in Los Angeles from that long-haul flight to Sydney, because it's during that long-haul flight that they're able to sedate everybody, including the billionaire's son, played by Cillian Murphy, I forget his name, so that they can enter into the first level of the dream, which is when the druggist, the chemist, was dreaming, and begin working on trying to convince Cillian Murphy's character that in fact he doesn't want to continue his father's work with this giant corporation, and that will fulfill the plans of Sato. Okay.
I don't know. I feel less convinced, maybe because I need to watch it a few more times. Sometimes it seems like a bit of a cliche to say, oh well, it's up to you to interpret what you want from it. I find that irritating, because otherwise, why?
Then how are you a Lynch fan?
Well, I'll argue about that another day. I don't think it isn't meant to be that loose, because even if you say, well, it's up to you how you want to interpret it, if you're the vessel for what the meaning of this film is, that still doesn't imply that the film has no meaning. So the notion of, this is a very sort of post-structuralist, postmodern idea that the author thinking they have an intention of what they do in the text isn't true, because they're a product of their environment, they're a product of us coming together as collective and then interpreting and saying how you're supposed to interpret it, and then give the person's biography and what would have led them to think that. But either way, there's still the possibility of some interpretation to the text. So if this is a text, it has a storyline, it has something to be interpreted. To just say it's whatever you want, then it's a bit of a cop-out.
I personally think that when he gets to the final layer, because Sato ends up getting shot in the first layer, dies in the third, ends up in the bottom recesses of Limbo. So a step beyond the third level, which is Limbo. It's a descent into Hades motif psychologized, because he's in hell, and now the hero Cobb, see, it's functioning on multiple levels. You've got the Labyrinth myth, because of the labyrinthine way in which the dreams are structured and created. The dreamscape is created by Ariadne. And you have, this points to Nolan's classical training. His training in the classics, Greek classics, and also the descent into Hades, because the very final scene, after he faces the nadir of his experience, namely knowing that he is indirectly responsible for his wife killing herself, and he faces that demon, and in facing that demon, in facing his responsibility, right, that he's responsible for that, he conquers it, okay? Then he's able to descend an even further layer in order to save Sato. And Sato's an old man there, and Cobb is young. It's like, on certain levels, on two levels at least, it functions psychologically along the parameters of a son saving a father. In this case, Cobb saving Sato from the depths of the underworld, so that Sato, stuck in Limbo, they're not going to call it hell, right? Limbo is a much more neutral term than Hades or purgatory, if you like, okay?
It obviously feels like hell. It's the basement, it's the bottom, it's
the basement. That's where he keeps Mole. He keeps Mole in the basement when Ariadne breaks into eavesdrops on his dream that's being administered to him by the chemist.
Well, and it's also hell.
She's in the basement. Yeah,
it's hell for her because she's down there, and it's complete isolation and separation.
And she's in hell too.
Yeah, well, that's what hell is. Complete separation.
That's right. So, complete separation from reality, from God, ultimately. So she's like a monster.
But then
in the underworld,
I feel like the story's more meaningful if at the end he's not in a dream.
I think it is too. Well, he kind of addresses her. Doesn't really. She's dead. So he addresses his responsibility in relation to her death by facing it.
Which is
he
more
saves
meaningful.
Sato then honors his end of the bargain by saving him, by restoring him to his children.
Yeah. So then, isn't it a bit kind of like it's more meaningful, that interpretation, because then it's about someone facing in a struggle, having to let someone go. It faced the grief and guilt of what he did to her by taking her down. And there's that like element as well. It's like it was very risky. It's like drug taking, right?
Yeah,
it has
yeah.
many of those elements, and
It
then
does, yeah.
he's had to be accountable for what he did.
That's right. That accountability. But this is
And then
all.
if it's all a dream, I don't know.
There's a whole bunch of psychology happening here, because
Yeah.
there are the archetypes. The archetype of Cillian Murphy and his father, the business mogul, Sato's rival, I don't remember his name, but of the son in life being, let's say, neglected, and he's a victim of narcissistic abuse in relation to his father. His father's a narcissist.
Yeah.
Doesn't want
another
anything
good
to do
one
with
as
him.
well.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he cannot address that in real life. He had to address it.
Basically,
In the dreamscape.
they all just did therapy.
They all just did therapy for
Sorry,
a few
Ellie.
hours on that plane,
Oh, this is the best way, because then you avoid the...
Oh, but this is good lighting for the view. With the suggestions made by the characters within the levels of the subconscious, first he has to address, it's all like Freudian and Jungian stuff, first he has to address the fact that his father resented him, then he has to project the blame onto his father's lawyer, who happens to be his godfather, namely that you're the one who wants to take over the business from me, and finally he has to reconcile with the idea that his father actually loved him, which is probably a lie included there by Tom Hardy's character, but his father didn't want Cillian Murphy to end up like him, which is to be a narcissistic business mogul, etc. So, it's quite the... it's functioning on a lot of levels. It needs multiple viewings.
Oh, yeah. I you can hold me to account. I think maybe 3 or 4 months from now, I'm going to have watched it a few more times and finished the Inception and philosophy book, and I'm going to come to a conclusion on whether it's all a dream or not, but a bit more definitive.
I don't think it was a dream. I think at the end he's in reality with his kids. He's restored to his kids.
Well, I'm interested in it's Nolan's big project. It was one he had in the works for a long time. I do not believe that he was indifferent on whether it was a dream or not.
No, let's see it. Let's got a bit more light.
Because if you were making a film, would you be like, oh, I don't...
No.
The more I think about it, the more...
No, I wouldn't do that either.
Or, even if it was, I'd want to know, well then...
But
it just seems like it's all noise. What's the meaning of it?
Look, I read some interviews with Nolan, and he said that basically he doesn't want to reveal it to us.
Yeah.
Or to anybody. But he knows. In the same way that Lynch and Frost know what happens in that final episode of Twin Peaks: The Return, right?
Oh...
Which is just, we need to do a whole series on Twin Peaks.
It makes you want to go find Frost and torture him until he reveals his secrets.
I know, because he reveals quite a bit in the secret history of the final dossier, but they're not giving up what happened. Anyway, I've got the article coming out on Twin Peaks, so when that comes out, we'll return to it. What did you think? So, okay, I'm saying that he's in reality.
Yeah.
In the end, he does finally get to hug his kids again, and what are you saying?
No,
Open question.
Okay. Look, if you're doing the how do you interpret it, I would say he is, and that the whole thing was a battle with his subconscious about the
but in that linear
feels.
narrative,
within that linear narrative. Then the question of, does the movie give enough clues to the answer of what Nolan thinks is happening? That's different, and I think if it's the case that I'm not convinced, I haven't thought about it enough, that it is all a dream. But if it is a dream, at the moment I'd be convinced that makes it a bit less meaningful.
We've got ambulance.
City.
It's a city. I think we can still cross. It's okay.
Yeah, but it strips it as to me.
Yeah. What did you think of the architecture as a final note? It's all constructionism. There's a little bit of neoclassicism there at the end when they start cherry picking. He's showing Ariadne the
building that they admired.
Buildings that they had chosen from their life together, he and Mo, to build in the dreamscape. But it's a bit dry. Doctor Strange does a similar thing.
I know next to zero about architecture. For your... Sorry to disappoint your viewers.
No, that's my interest, yeah.
To me, I have like a very crude way of describing it. It just feels a bit kind of cold and clinical and business and corporate. And like I loved, they have very, very nice suits. They're extremely well fitting.
All the characters,
everything else has got that kind of corporate gloss, so it feels like it just blends away. And that's why that house stands out, because it's quite the cottage house. It's a cottage house. It's like a cottage house. I don't know. It's kind of cute and doesn't fit the rest of it.
Mole's house.
But maybe that's because that's Dreamworld. Dreamworld doesn't have aesthetic finesse to all the details and buildings in that head, does it? Not in my dreams.
Oh,
I tell you what, the other
I think
thing
it can. I think it can. I've had dreams like that.
The other thing is, there's very few people that I know of. You know, you can read about this in lucid dreaming studies. So they have, like, you know, proper psychological research into people that do lucid dreaming. But there's very few people that can fight.
That's the word for it. What we were describing for lucid dreaming. That's it.
Yeah, lucid dream.
That's right.
There are people that master skills tend to be able to develop those skills in dreams. So like I remember when I was first learning to type and write a lot, I would see sentences and breaking down sentences and the parts of them, you know, going through subject, predicate, all these like little finicky parts. But the bits that are different with fighting is that it's the physical body, and the point of the body in sleep is to shut down so that you will not get up. So that's an interesting thing, that there's so much fighting in the film.
I know. As if, wouldn't that fighting wake you up?
Yeah, which goes against the realism aspect of it.
It does.
But anyway, they're all my thoughts.
Inception, great film. Christopher Nolan. I think you're right about it's a bit clinical. It has warmth though because of DiCaprio's performance. So does Interstellar as well. We should probably do that one day too. Interstellar, it's a great film. Tenet I thought was cold.
No bright colours like Lynch, no neon colours, no neon.
There's nothing like that. No, Lynch
Never.
is all about the colours and imagery. That's your final word?
Yeah. Do we do a rating on all our films? Is that a thing?
I give it it's a 4 out of 5 for me, 4.5. It's very close to a 5 out of 5. I love this film. Yeah, about a 4.
Yeah, 84%.
84%. Please like and subscribe and share, friends. Until next time.
Cheers.